been a long time no see with the Ask Nico Q&A, the non-live version, the recorded version. I did want to talk a little bit about that before I get into these lovely questions that I have here, and what's been going on with that. Now, the Q&A kind of went into an interesting place, over the last 2 months. A lot of you know I also do the live Q&A, so if you're brand new and don't know, the Ask Nico Live Q&A, that goes on every month, the last Tuesday of every month at 4 p.m. Pacific time, okay? And it's right here on this channel, so a lot of people I noticed were kind of like, well, when do you do it? And so we've been doing it for about 6 months now, so it's still kind of fresh, and it's every last Tuesday of the month at 4 p.m. Pacific. The reason I haven't been doing the recorded Q&A is that I haven't been getting very many questions for it. Okay, and so I was like, well, maybe I just should not do it every Tuesday. Maybe that's the thing. So what I've decided to do is I'm just going to do it whenever I see that there are enough questions to do. And because the thing is that some people made some comments that were very, understandable about where it was going the first round. It got to this point where it was like, people were only asking like very, very individualized, personal, practically just astrology reading questions, and these were kind of alignments and figures and parts of astrology that would apply to like 1 in every 1,000 people, and a lot of people just aren't even able to connect to that. And that's not what the recorded Q&A is for. The recorded Q&A is kind of for an educational thing. And the live Q&A is when you can come in with those questions, absolutely. And we do a lot of stuff on personal astrology charts there, we ask any kind of questions and get any kind of answers. So the recorded Q&A, henceforth, is going to be whenever I get enough questions, and that's usually like 5 or 6, whenever I get enough questions, I will deliver answers in a recorded Q&A. So it'll be a bit more sporadic than before. Please, guys, I had to go hunt all these down. Please remember, ask these questions for the Q&A on Q&A videos, on the Scarlet Moon Facebook page, or you can message the Scarlet Moon inbox on Facebook, or you can tweet at me at Scarlet Moon Nico on Twitter. Those are the ways you can get a hold of me for the Q&As, because, and like I've said before, if you post them on horoscope videos or any other videos, it's going to get buried under mounds of comments, but this is the way to help me keep it organized and help me find your questions faster. Alright, so now that we've got all of that out of the way, let's get started with the questions here. So, Lippy Witch, what is your favorite Sabbath and why? Now, Sabbath is basically like a holy day, a holiday, and what she's referring to are pagan holidays, the major pagan holidays throughout the year, and those are the ones like Yule and Samhain that became things like Christmas or Halloween. And my personal favorite Sabbath is Imbolc, the one that happens on February 2nd. For those of you who follow Catholicism, that is Candlemas. And the reason I like Imbolc a lot is because it's all about purification, and a big part of my spiritual path and spiritual priority is routine spiritual purification of myself and of my space. That is also the time when I bless my altar candles and charge my altar candles that stay on my altar. And that's also when I make my working candles and, do a big charging and cleansing and clearing of my tools for the year and dismantle all my old stuff. So that's always a fun time of year for me, so I like that. Plus, my goddess Bridget, that is her day. Mythic Rare asks, okay, I'm not putting in contacts today because I've got a bit of a headache. Mythic Rare asks, the number 1010 or 1010 keeps following me everywhere. So what's going on with that? Well, the number 1010 usually speaks to a point of great completion. Tens that show up tend to talk a lot about a cycle of life or an era or a chapter coming to an end. And that's why we have cards like, say, in the tarot deck, like the 10 of Cups. It's one of those, kind of a very happy end to a cycle or a chapter. or the Ten of Pentacles, an end to a chapter that ends, yes, very well, because the Ten of Pentacles is one of the best cards in the deck, but it does also talk about long-term gains from ending that chapter. So I would say that you have an ending coming, maybe two, because it's a 10-10. This could actually be, you know, anything from like a graduation moment in a literal sense, moving out. This could be starting a new phase in your life, kind of bringing a lot of long-standing, you know, outlandish, well not outlandish, but outstanding trends or things that have gone on for too long are going to start coming to an end for you. Okay, so that could actually be a good thing. Shadowlander asks, how would we find out about our past lives? Well, there are several ways you can find out about your past lives. You can go for a past life regression, but I do want you to be careful with that, because sometimes past life regression, in a lot of cases, especially with hypnotherapy, you know, you've got to make sure that you know who you're working with. I do believe in things like implanted memories, where a person can kind of make up a memory for you, or make up a memory and kind of put it in your head, and so you kind of feel like it really happened, because memories can and do often change that way. So be careful with that, but past life regression therapy like that would work. If you practice tarot, there are tarot spreads that you can learn that can help you identify your past life. There's also a way to even look in astrology to find out about the past life that's immediately affecting this life. And that's by studying the North and South nodes. And I do have a video on the North and South nodes. If you want to check that out on this channel, you can search that on the search bar on this channel. Because the North node is going to talk about what past life lessons you are learning in the present. And the South node is going to talk about what you finished in your last life, what past life karma you are bringing into the present as well. So you can find out a lot about past lives through astrology too. John asks, alright, how could an hourglass, like an hourglass, be used in a spell or a ceremony? Hourglasses themselves tend to, of course, always talk about the notion of speeding up time and energetic development. When you're using an hourglass in a ceremonial working of any kind, whether it is a spell or a ritual or a manifestation circle or whatever you want to call it, or a healing circle even, you would work with an hourglass in a way where you would be staggering how that energy is put forth into the world. Okay? Not unlike if you were to, say, light a candle, do a prayer, snuff out the candle, come back. It's like you're turning it on, turning it off, turning it on, turning it off. And that is actually a very good strategy for a lot of manifestation techniques, especially if you're trying to create something. Because remember, there's a difference between manifestation and attraction. And manifestation is kind of putting that energy out to become something that's not already there. Attraction is drawing something that is out there to you, or drawing yourself to it. So what you would do with the hourglass, say if you were doing like a crystal grid or a spell or something like that, is that you would actually keep the candle burning or keep the energy of the grid going for as long as the hourglass works. Then, you know, shut it off, close the ceremony, you know, turn the hourglass, you know, just leave it as it is, and come back to it another day. And what you would do is you'd want to do this in sequence, you know, over the course of maybe 3 days, 7 days, 9 days. And what the hourglass is going to do is it's basically going to speed up the work of what you're doing if you can maintain the discipline of that commitment. Nobody here. Alright, I'd like to know more about your discussion on differentiating between different spiritual terms, such as the difference between somebody who is an empath versus somebody who is psychic versus intuitive, or say versus a highly sensitive person versus an empathetic person, or between, you know, a witch, a Wiccan, and a pagan. What are the differences between all these things? That could almost be a video in and of itself. Typically, an empath is somebody who can read emotions and pick up on emotions at a very, very, you know, I guess you could say a very sensitive way. So an empath and a highly sensitive person can be confused a lot of the time. An empath is somebody who could not only read the emotions, but they can actually read the source of those emotions. So An empath isn't just somebody who is going to be like, oh, somebody is sad because I feel sadness in my heart chakra. That's a highly sensitive person. An empath is going to be like, okay, I'm picking up on this sadness and I know where it's coming from. It's coming from that person's grief. It's coming from that person's breakup. You know, and that's how empaths would do their readings. Now, when it comes to, say, an intuitive versus a psychic, intuitive is basically the underlying gift or ability that we all have, that sixth sense, okay? Everyone is an intuitive. It all depends on how developed or how trained they are. And intuition itself is just the ability to gather knowledge, you know, through, again, opening up that receptivity to spirit. Being psychic is a little different, because being psychic is where you actually have that ability kind of focused into very firm areas, you know. So psychic people have a tendency to, you know, be able to turn on, I guess you could say, kind of a focus or a specialty. And everyone has the capacity to be psychic as well. So in my case, it's definitely very, very strong in foretelling, you know, in kind of looking into the future, divination, things like that. That is a big one for me. Claircognizance is also one for me, where I can kind of download information. It's involuntary most of the time, where I could just kind of pick up on information that'll help me learn how to do things that, you know, might require some serious technical skill and training, especially in the case of things like working with computers or anything technological. An intuitive is not going to have that crystal clear. And it's not to say that intuitives are any less gifted than psychics, but intuitives tend to have it be a little bit more generalized, where it's like divination one day, foretelling the future one day, and then the next day they're a telepath, and the next day they're a medium, and the next day they're back to divination. And so it's like they're kind of honing an ability, and they'll kind of usually graduate into a psychic sort of place when they pick their focus. It's like the difference between having, you know, kind of like a general education versus a major. You know, it doesn't mean anyone's more or less smart. It's about where you're training, if that makes sense. Witch, Wiccan, and pagan, and where those all relate and don't relate. A pagan is really somebody who, I guess you could say, is really just somebody who works much more closely with the spiritual energies of the earth. There are a lot more pagan people in the world than, you know, than I guess you could say the disposition would imply, okay? To work with crystals is pagan. To work with herbs is pagan. To work with anything that has to do with, you know, working with elemental kingdoms, nature, all that kind of stuff, that is very pagan, because paganism is all about, again, the word just means country dweller, you know, or rural person, and it basically just means, you know, nowadays, contemporarily, a person whose spirituality revolves around their relationship with nature. When it comes to witch versus Wiccan, here's where you get the big one. Witches themselves are basically kind of like magical, spiritual martial artists. You know, witch and witchcraft, witch just means wise, and witchcraft means craft of the wise. And so a witch can be pretty much anything and follow any kind of spiritual path. That's why you have hoodoo witches, you have Celtic witches, you have eclectic witches, you have Christian witches. And what happens with, you know, with that is that a witch is somebody who is kind of taking the role of being a creator or a co-creator into their own hands. They are, you know, they kind of commune with the divine, they make connections with spirits, with deity, or with deities, depending on how they do. And they do tend to run that manifestation process through themselves. It's kind of like they're taking that source energy, that divine spiritual energy, into themselves to work with. Whereas people who are not witches tend to kind of try and go up and out, and then petition for source to do that, if that makes sense. So witches are a little bit, you know, it's very close to alchemy in that sense. Wicca and Wiccan is actually sort of a, I guess you could say, they don't like to call themselves an organized religion, but it's a religion that is comprised of witches, but not all witches are Wiccan. Okay, a lot of people will use the comparison and say that Wicca is to witchcraft as Catholicism is to Christianity. So most Wiccans, a great deal of Wiccans, probably all of them, are witches and are self-identified as witches. And not all witches, however, identify as Wiccan. Like, I do not identify as Wiccan, though I am a witch. Okay, so that is basically a quick rundown for the sake of this video. So thank you very much, though, for all your questions, guys. If you have any questions of this nature or on any other spiritual topic that you think it would be great to get an answer for, or it might be kind of fun for other people to know, please let me know. If you ever want to ask questions, remember, post a comment below, or you can post it at the Scarlet Moon Facebook page, or you can tweet at me at Scarlet Moon Nico, alright? And I think, yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to just do this every Tuesday. I'm just going to kind of have it come out when it comes out. You know, whenever there's a bunch of questions that are going to be cool to answer, let's just get it going and let's just kind of go, you know, so it could be once a week, it could be twice a month, it could be whatever happens, alright? So I hope you guys found this helpful, and I will talk to you later.